Welcome to Puck Talk CS. I'm Chives, Matthew Mugno, along with Steve O. We're recording this before the Boston Bruins matchup, following the Ducks matchup, little history there. And we'll have a special guest on later in the episode, David Alter, hockey news writer covering the Toronto Maple Leafs. Born and raised Leafs fan. He's got the inside. He knows it all. Steve O, I want to know how you're doing today.
I'm doing fantastic, Chives. How are you?
I'm great. I mean, got in last night from the game, wrote a game story on Chris Kringle. Merry Christmas from the man himself, number 20. And on top of that, wrote a story on Adam Edstrom. How could you not? I mean, what a story. Last second call up, last second lineup decision, and literally last second goal. So
Gotta love stories like that. I can tell you nobody saw that coming for sure.
Steve,
So
are you
without
ready to
further
roll?
ado, I say we talk some puck, Chives. Again,
Yes,
stay
sir.
tuned. We got a big interview incoming later in this episode, so stay tuned for that. We're excited to bring that to you. But let's dive into this team, New York Rangers. All right, let's talk about that Leafs game first. Not a game that we were expecting, but my main point that I want to bring up with this is Shesterkin, bro. I mean, what's going on with him?
Yeah, the real question right now is now quick after last night is 9-0-1. I would assume Shesterkin starting against Boston. So with that, quick looks really good. The real question is it's not really a right now the dynamic is not backup and starter. It's basically like starter and starter. And I think that's a good thing for the New York Rangers. For Igor Shesterkin, he's your franchise goalie. That's not a question. But you do have a guy that started in the NHL, won 2 Stanley Cups, can be a mentor to Shesterkin, and is 9-0-1. You got to take that. And that one in the third column there was such a fluke play in a shootout. I know the Rangers surrendered goals and they were up 3-0 in that game, but Quick could easily be undefeated. He's played that way. He plays with his swag. He plays that Gumby style, Mike Richter, Dominic Hasek style. I've You gotta love what he brings to the team. Gotta love his leadership. But as you're saying, Shesterkin was shaky against the Maple Leafs. Part of that, though, I feel it can be a little bit of that maybe Hank Igor effect, where it's like, all right, our star, the guy is in net. But then again, John Quick's playing so well, so I don't buy into that 100%. But the team does play a little bit different in front of the different goaltenders. They gave up rush chances. They gave up shots right in the slot. The top end players for the Maple Leafs came through, and it's almost a bummer because you want to see Austin Matthews against Igor Shesterkin as a top matchup in the NHL between top goal scorer, top goaltender. It's not the case right now. I think if you're going to take your lumps, though, like we've said with Fox injury, Hedel injury, take them now, right?
I guess so, if that's going to be the case. First of all, I want to bring up one element of Igor's game that I think he wasn't really great at, but like this year, it's really hit him, and that's rebounds, man. Igor off a rebound. I think I could score. I think even you, both of us, could score a rebound off Shesterkin. That's how bad he's had it this year. And this might be a hot take, Chives, but I think this game against the Leaf might have been it's up there for probably our worst loss of the year. And here's why.
Yeah.
I think the significance of this game, and not only that, but the opportunity was there, and the writing was on the wall for the Rangers. You know, you're going up against one of the most offensive, explosive teams in the league, and
Hmm.
it really just turned out to be a dud. I mean, let's take a look at on the other end, Mark Jones. I mean, we're turning the clock back like this is Puck Talk 2016 right now. I mean, what the hell is up with us not being able to score against a third string goalie this year? I mean, that I can't figure out. And I'm talking about the whole year, not just this year, last year too.
Yeah. The worst losses, now that you say that, though, Washington wasn't good. Nashville wasn't good at home. Those were both 4-0 shutouts. I think where I'm going to rephrase what you said a little bit, and this is my take. You have your take. You want to say worst loss? I see that. I think this was up there because of the caliber of the team you're playing. You're a top three team in the NHL. This Maple Leafs matchup, you should be in the game. That's not even a question. Your starter should be keeping you in the game. You should be in that game. I think it's funny because we've seen a spectrum where the Columbus loss, he had 2 goals taken away from you, right? That Nashville loss, I feel like sticks out the most to me. What I'm struggling with as reporting on the team and trying to kind of like find the small statistics that add up. Listen, the games are the games. They're there to play the games. You're going to lose games. It's more about like how many times are you going to put yourself in a situation where you have to bounce back, respond, and prove yourself, right? I think that's kind of the angle you're coming with too. Like this game shouldn't have been a loss where then they have to prove themselves against a struggling Ducks team that came in 1-9-0 in their last 10. It should have been a game that you're at least hanging in where it's like, all right, we were in that game. Valaket actually said that. My dad was telling me on the post game report. But do you think that's the angle you have, or is it really just like straight up bad loss?
It wasn't like a bad loss. Like the Capitals loss was a bad loss. Don't get me wrong. The Ottawa loss, bad loss. But in terms of the way I look at it and through this lens is that this was a bad loss because okay, we really struggled up front with
Definitely in the
defensively.
first period.
I know in the first period the Rangers were not ready to play this game, and the fact of the matter is when you go up against explosive players and quite frankly one of the best players in hockey in Austin Matthews, you need to be ready to defend. And when they have the skill up front, and let's take it the first period as a whole, the Rangers were not ready to defend against this team, and it was very sloppy. A lot of sloppy plays in our own end, and then kind of we shift to the second period, much better second period. I don't know what Laviolette communicated to the guys in the locker room, but you say Blake Wheeler comes out, gets two, Zibanejad's getting one. All right, we got that little glimpse, and then it gets completely squashed with their two best guys in Matthews and Marner. And for me, I mean the three get I to me in this game we got beaten by three guys. That was Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, and Martin Jones. And three guys beat our whole entire team. So to me, that's the kind of the viewpoint I look at it. And again, Toronto is one of those teams. And for me, the Washington game, we had nothing.
Yeah.
There really was nothing watching that game, or even Ottawa too, where I was like, okay, we're turning it around a little bit. This game, I had some hope, but unfortunately, it was a little bit too late. When you have such a tough first period, there's really, I mean, it puts you in that much of a hole where I thought we were gonna we could come back, and if we did come back, that would have been awesome. But again, getting beat by the same two guys, I mean, for me, that definitely. I'm not saying this is the worst loss of the year so far, but this is definitely, in my opinion, uh, top two, top two.
Okay, I'll agree with that. Blake Wheeler gets 2 goals though. That's good. I think a good sign. It showed that he's still, he's still got game in him, right? Like flies up the wing, scores that second goal. That was nasty. I actually tweeted at the game. I was like, a Blake Wheeler 2-goal game would go crazy. They
I
cut the
was
lead.
pumped.
Laviolette stated that they're able to make, and this is something that goes back to the summer. You hire Laviolette so you could have in-game adjustments. They give up a few goals in the first period. They respond. That was a good takeaway. Now, Steve, I want to fast forward here, talk a little bit. Actually, I want to say that I don't want to talk about the Keandre Miller thing because that definitely has a little bit to do with the defensive play, right? Like Jones, Schneider getting more time, things of that nature. Gustafson adjusting to playing with Truba, more of a veteran guy with Truba. Offensive instincts. You keep Fox and Lindgren together. Fox looks great, but you don't have Miller, a top 4 guy. I don't want to talk about it, and here's why. I think the way the Connor Bedard thing was handled spiraled out of control with speculation and rumor. And to me, something's going on with Miller. I think it's, for lack of better words, run of the mill. And I don't want to really talk about it, right? Like, I don't think it's fair. He's our age. He's an NHL player. He's a young guy. Leave him be. Personal reasons, right? So they're without him in the lineup. I would assume he's not going on the trip to Boston. So the defense is going to look the same. But something Peter Laviolette, I spoke actually with him at practice on Thursday this week, and he said he doesn't think the lineup adjustments or lineup changes with Kako, Heedle, Barkley, Goodrow going down, VC taking a puck to the face, no Keandre Miller. He said that that's not really affecting the team, but I think in reality, when you look at it, you have to say I think it does a little bit from the third party's point of view, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Hopefully, I would say we get him back against the Bruins. I mean, you hearing
I
anything?
don't think I don't think he's going to make the trip. I mean, at this point, if you're listening to this, you'll know or not. But
Yeah. Oh, hopefully, it's not something that again we can't speculate. Was he back at practice?
um, yeah, he's practicing.
He's practicing. Okay, that's a positive sign. So I'm not
He's
sure.
around the team, right? Like that's a good thing.
That's a
That's a
good
good
thing too.
takeaway.
Yeah, yeah. I think he'll be back. I wouldn't be surprised to see him back if you want to call it game two against Toronto.
Game
Coming up.
two. Well, I'll say this, Stevo. With Chris Kreider, passes Adam Graves. He ties him, passes him, records his 500th career point, 100th Mr. Power Play goal with his 100th of his career, eighth active player to reach that milestone. Phenomenal. Question for you, and this is something that's floated around the internet. Rafters. Do you think Chris Kreider no cup? I mean, we could talk about this, and we're going to talk about it for a long time. His night last night gives, I think, New York radio you know, material for friggin' 8 months. I have a question quick before we hop into talking about that game and moving forward with our interview with David Alter. Do you think they hang it up at the end of his career?
I do. I do
Yeah.
think they hanging up after his
No
career.
cup too. Even if there's
No
no cup.
cup. Listen, what he is meant to this franchise, and you go back and see how many categories he leads the franchise in. I mean, it's a long list. I mean, going back to what year was that where there was the major speculation where they were going to trade him? Was that
2020. It was
20?
right before COVID. There was speculation, and remember, like you're saying, John Davidson like walked out, and everyone was like, "Oh my god, they're going to trade him." And then he was like, "We signed a contract with him," and he announced the Buchnevich Igor car accident.
Yes, I remember that.
I was
Uh,
a big believer in signing him.
We both were. I remember
We
on
both
this
were.
podcast,
Yeah.
I remember both of us. We said that they need to sign him, and I know a lot of people in sports media were like, the Rangers have to trade him. I mean, and if the Rangers got rid of him, I mean, this alters the direction of the franchise in so many levels. And it
Hmm.
just to me, the decision that again, Rangers were not looking pretty heavy at that time, but the decision to stick with him shows me that this is our franchise player, or one of our franchise players. And again, to me, I don't think there's any doubt. I would say yes. But again, his career's not over yet. So I mean, we'll see. There's high aspirations this year. I'll spin it back to you. Do you agree?
I am in the party that I am on the fence. And here's why. I'm a big believer. Like when people say Mike Richter Hall of Fame, I question it. I think retiring a jersey number, like no other player in franchise history can wear that again. That's significant. I I've enjoyed the Ring of Honors. Elliot Friedman actually said on 32 Thoughts that he's not a huge fan of those, and I understand that perspective. I welcome it. I accept it. And me myself, there are times where I understand that. You don't want to have like 100 players in a Ring of Honor, right? Like then it's like, so it's all subjective. I think a cup would do. I think that's a shoe in. He's like 90 to me. It's like a 90% there to me. But if he obviously brings home Lord Stanley, that's a completely different conversation. Like that's like not even a question.
How about this? I do agree with you. I'm on the fence of it right now, but I'm
Mhm.
considering the fact that he's got more time to play. I think when it's all said and done, I think he will be. As of right now, I agree with you. I think that it's still up in the air. It's 50-50. But the reason I say yes is because he still has time. It's not some like, he's ending soon. You know what I mean? So he's still
Yeah.
got time. And I'm saying when it's all said and done, I think he will be pushed over the edge to get it. But we'll
Miko
see.
was pumped for him, man.
I was not expecting that question, but I love it.
Yeah, Miko was pumped for him. I will say though, Crowder spoke. I think this is the first time he spoke, at least at a home game, because obviously that's what I'm covering, like the practice home game. That might be the first time I think the media spoke to him. He spoke for like 30 seconds. But you know what? I don't think it's that he's a grizzled veteran. I think he has one goal in mind, and I think it's to win. And I know he had a quote actually at the start of last season. I was looking through some Instagram posts the other day. Right before last season started, 22-23. I remember he had like a hard quote that was like, "We got our sights on one thing, and that's the Stanley Cup." I think since then, that's his mentality. He went off in the playoffs. He was the guy again. He's a 16 game player. I think he's a player. This is a little bit of a prediction, Sibo. I think with that mindset and the way he carried himself after having such a historic night, I don't think it's that he's like, oh, he's just not about certain things anymore, like dealing with the media, this, that. I think it's like he has his sights on one thing, and I admire that. That's like Kobe Bryant mindset, like get in there, get the job done. I want the cup. I like that. And you can feel that, which is it's magnetic.
I like that too, but it's easier said than done. So let's
Oh
see.
yeah.
All right, so let's kind of transition over here. We'll talk about the Ducks game a little bit and kind of preview now moving ahead quickly before the interview. Game two against the Leafs. Now, the big speculation we talked about on last week's episode was you have Igor struggling a little bit. Who do you start against the Ducks compared to Boston? We kind of predicted it a little bit. Maybe our opinions differed a little bit, but we eventually said correctly what Laviolette was going to, and that was correct. Laviolette seemed to want to put Quick out there against the Ducks. That worked. Igor is going to get the start against Goliath and the Bruins. Then we transition over to the Leafs. I would assume that Igor is going to get the back to back and he's going to play Boston. And then on Tuesday, he's going to go back out again and play the Leafs.
Oh, baby, such a hot take. Oh, Steve. Now you know what? I think Quick's gonna be in. We're gonna completely differ on this.
Oh,
9-0-1, Steve. You go with the veteran guy. You go with the guy that's been steady right now. You gotta let, I think, Igor find his game. And it's again the same conversation we had last week where we're ahead of the game. We don't know the exact starters and everything, but you said, do you start Shesterkin if he has a tough game against Toronto? And they didn't. Quick has been really a crucial part of these bounce backs against LA last week after the two losses, right? I think Igor's got to find his game. Now, why do you think no matter if it's a win or loss, they go with Igor in Toronto?
I think they do put Igor back in there no matter the result against Boston. Here's why. I think we need to get confidence back in him, and he's got to have a rebound game against the Leafs. Team that beat you, and he's the type of player that I think he's had that drive. He's got, he says the right things himself too. We know he's got that passion, and a player like this, could really flip his confidence. Not to say that his confidence is what's doing him in here, because again, defense a little sloppy when he plays, but I think that you got to have confidence in your guy, and especially I'm not this isn't a must-win game. Like if this is a must-win game and we're playing here at the end of April and beginning of April, end of March, beginning of April, and we're saying, you know what, we need to sneak into the playoffs. We need to win this game. Then I 100% agree with you, Charles. I'm saying we got to put the hot hand out there, and that's Quick. Because at this moment, yes, I do trust Quick more than I do Igor. However, this is not a must-win game, and I think to me the priority of this team, we got to get Igor going, man. We got to get his confidence back, and I think doing it against the team, and again, come playoffs time, he's going to be playing the same team every single night. And let's say we do play the Leafs, and Igor craps the bed, he's gonna have to go out the next night and perform against this team in the playoffs. So listen, he comes out game one against the Leafs. Game one, I like how we labeling this like a playoff series. He comes in game one, doesn't do well, doesn't perform well. I fully expect Laviolette to bring him out in game two and bring it up because he is our guy. As much as Quick has been like I've said, he's been our MVP so far up to this point, one of our
That's
MVPs.
true.
I think we have to put Shesterkin back in net, dude. I'm telling you, like again, he's our guy, and
I don't one. I don't think he's been the MVP. I think it's been Panarin. And two, with that stated, I think you start him. We are just flip flopping on everything. I, and listen, I see your angle 100%. You got to get your guy going. I would actually flip that. If this is April, I think you have to put Igor in and just like he's got to find a way mentally. Like that's it. And to be honest, in a playoff series, this is like that Braden Holtby, Philip Grubauer 2018 deal. I don't know if Shesterkin, if this listen, I don't think it'll cascade that long, but if this is something in April that's a problem, and Shesterkin, you play him night in and night out, and he still can't find a rhythm, and is struggling to perform, I'd think about starting Johnny Quick game one. Now, I'll say this though, it's like I don't think at this point it's we can establish and clear the air though on this conversation. It's Quick. This isn't like a a short thing that's like, oh, like a Heatlemania when Heatle was a rookie, where it's like, all right, at some point this will cool off. I mean, there'll probably be games here and there, but I think this is how Quick is performing. I think he does. Peter Laviolette said in the postgame yesterday he doesn't view himself as a backup. And that doesn't make competition between him and Igor. It's more of you have two capable starters.
It's funny how we were talking about the Metro, and not to say this is more of an issue for the Devils and Carolina than the Rangers, but goaltending has not really lived up to expectations for all these teams here in the Metro, or at least the top dogs that we thought were to be. So that's
Mhm.
been an interesting storyline up to this point in the season. But in terms of playoffs, this is all like hypothetical. But do you how about this? I'll ask you this. Do you expect Jonathan Quick to maintain this throughout the whole course of the season?
That's a good question. I right now I think anyone says yes. Um, I just think the way he's playing, the confidence. He gave up 4 goals against Minnesota in that loss, and that was earlier in the year. Like at that point, don't quote me, 3-0-1 maybe. Like at that point, he was like he hadn't played that many games. He was building that confidence against Seattle and Edmonton, but at that point, I would say yeah, maybe a question. But now 9-0-1. Listen, do who knows, right? In a few months, but I think it's the consistency in that and the way he's playing. I think it is 100%. Steve-O, I love the observation on the Metro. I do think that is a good observation. The goaltending is not, I think, there for all of the Rangers' most consistent opponents, the opponents they face the most in this regular season. And I will say this too, have to bring up not only Adam Edstrom, but the way the Wolfpack has left a mark on the New York Rangers this season. Will Cooley skates with Brodzinski and Edstrom. He scores. He looked really good. I think he's a player that earlier in the year, we talked about injuries. Shesterkin going down, Quick stepped up. Fox went down, Gustafsson stepped up. Now you have more guys going down, right? Miller not around. You have Zach Jones in his place. You have to tip the cap. Edstrom looked good. I was impressed with the fact that in years past, the Rangers would not have brought these guys up. AV would not. He didn't even play JT Miller and Kevin Hayes. He was not a rookie friendly bench boss. I don't think Dave Quinn would have brought guys up like this and put them into positions to succeed. Gerard Gallant would not have. He barely gave the opportunity to Loft Kako, guys that were in the NHL mainstay. I'm loving that Peter Laviolette is having these guys as integral parts of the lineup while there's unhealthy players and injuries. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, first things first, gotta tip your hat to that point. Yeah, they've been fantastic. I tell you what, our team, and that's the Hartford Wolfpack, they got that dog in them. They
They're
really
third.
do.
They're third in the AHL.
They've always been good in years that in past years.
Yeah, they've
So
been on the come up.
they have been, and you love to see that continuation of success, even though we lost our head coach over to Edmonton, which by the way, we'll see him later, within the next week.
Yeah,
And
Chris Laubach. Yeah,
I knew
they
I
loved
do.
him.
They do, yeah, and we'll see him later on this week. I have a point on that I'll bring up in a second, but this team has that dog in them, and you love to see these guys coming up and contributing. And not only that, but you know, in moments when I don't want to say we need it most, but in moments where, hey, Keandre Miller not in the lineup, next man up, and we still find a way to win. And that to me, that's a full complementary team, and that's
Mhm.
really what this team. I don't want to say it was been lacking in recent years, but this team has definitely executed that to the most, and I like that. Bringing up Edmonton, we're going to be playing them within the next week. What is up with the schedule, man? I think it's been a little stinky. I mean, you get these weird breaks where we have 3 nights off, and then we're getting hit with back to back. I mean, we're playing the Ducks, then we go on the road and we got to play Boston. We go to play Toronto. I think we get another 2 to 3 nights off, and then we get hit. We got to go to Edmonton, then come back and play the Sabers at home. I mean, weird, just a weird schedule all around.
I'm not the. I mean, I'm not traveling, right? But I'm not the happiest with with those home games, like you're saying. Like around Christmas, that's what I like we celebrate. I know I celebrate. I know not everyone celebrates that, but around that time, there's like 4 games at home and there's a back to back. Like Christmas Eve and day are right there, and there's a game after that and like 2 games before that. But then like this week, because they're away, I don't cover the team for like a full week. So it's been kind of hard to not only from that aspect, but also for the players. Like you said, like it's been now I count this is the 8th back-to-back set this season. 8th. It's December. And like you're saying, then during the week, there's been not a lot of games during the week. It's just, I don't know. I'm not a fan. The other reporters talking to them, they're not fans of it either. It's funny. Everyone kind of at the same time pointed that out. So that was a good observation, Steve-O. At least that's what everyone was kind of saying last night that was covering the game. Like, what is with the schedule?
It's weird, and in past years I haven't recalled where we've had 8 back to backs, and we're sitting here in the second to third week of December. But that plays more to our point, our last point, that goaltending, having two reliable guys, or at least having that one reliable guy in Jonathan Quick, especially when we're going to be playing our ninth back to back next week. I mean, that definitely plays to a point why the Rangers are in the position that they are as of right now. All right, before we bring David in here, let's quickly preview and give our thoughts on game two, if you want to call it, against Rangers Leafs. Chives, we're on the road on this one. What does this team need to do in order to change the result and bring the victory home on this one?
Fast start. They gave up the first goal against Anaheim. They've given up the first goal a number of games this season. You got to get the first goal, got to get on the board first, and that way you can defend. I think the team, yes, has had some resiliency. Blake Wheeler said after the loss, actually, that, this is a learning thing. And I think they will learn from that. And I think when they go into Toronto, you can do things to score first, right? It's not like something that you get too high on or too low on if you don't score first. But I think a good start is really it. They didn't have a good start against the Leafs last game, and if you're focusing on that matchup alone, that's what you're going to need. I think you're going to need a good start because a team like Anaheim last night banged up, rebuilding. They're a team that, yeah, you go down 1-0, okay, but this Leafs team is a top team in the league. You got to find a way to hang in there. So that's what I'll say. Steve, what do you think the team needs to do when they head to Toronto on Tuesday?
I'll go with you on the same point that we need to get off to a fast start, but I'll look at it from a different angle. Instead of jumping out and scoring, one or two goals first, we don't even have to score the first goal, in my opinion. I think we need to come out and we need to be ready to defend these guys. We need to, going back to that game one, we weren't ready to defend. We were making a lot of sloppy plays on our end. We were making smart decisions, and that really has not been our style to play up to this point in the season. Okay, Laviolette has kind of imprinted this on our guys since that first game in Buffalo, and we need to get to that. We need to get back to that style of hockey. Defensively, we weren't blocking shots. Defensively, we weren't getting in there and getting the puck and winning the battles in the neutral zone. So again, I want to see. You know how you have those feelings like at the end of the first period, it's 0-0, but you're like, wow, even though we didn't score, we won that period. That's the kind of period that the Rangers need to have in order to really, because again, the Rangers did turn it up in the second period. So again, putting ourselves in a position where when we do turn it up, and again, if it's Martin Jones, I'm not expecting a Vesna quality night out of him. So again, we could dial it up. The offense, again, I think is there. We just need to put ourselves in a better position and play better as soon as the puck drops.
I'll say this though, okay? Maybe, just maybe, like these guys, maybe just hang like 9 goals and call it a day. That would be nice, right? Coming
Yeah,
off of the 0-point week.
you would like to see nine goals, and just like Antonio Pierce said in halftime, Lavallette's got to say the same thing in intermission. We up 5-0, baby. Foot on the gas.
Foot on the gas. Foot on the gas. And with that, I think we toss it over to David Alter. I met him. Actually, he travels. He covers a team. He's got like 22K followers. He's a big dog in the Toronto media world. And I think with hockey, it's like church there. So he's one of those guys. They say the Toronto media is intense. He's been covering the team for a number of years now. He said he was a fan growing up, so he's had that connection. Now he observes it more from a less more of an objective view. He writes for the Hockey News. He was one of the first site managers. So I hopped on board after Johnny hopped on board, and they already had some of these sites going. He's doing a phenomenal job, and we got to toss it to him for our interview as he previews that matchup on Tuesday night. It's my pleasure to introduce to everybody David Alter, the Hockey News reporter for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're killing it there. Number one site for the Hockey News out of our team sites. He's worked all over. He's worked startups, athletic, just mentioned, has opportunities across the United States, across Canada. He travels with the team. He's been to Sweden. David, it's a pleasure to have you on. How are you today?
Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate that introduction. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, been anywhere and everywhere, and I'm really happy to be here.
You are in Toronto right now. The Rangers traveling up to take on the Maple Leafs. It's like a game two of a playoff series. Played a game one last week. 7 days later, they're traveling again up there, except there's no Austin Matthews last night from illness. Does that have an effect on the game against the New York Rangers?
It could. I mean, we'll see what his status ends up being, but the good news for the Toronto Maple Leafs is that they seem to elevate their game whenever Austin Matthews isn't in the lineup. I don't know why, but for the last little bit or so, their record is like 650 percentage when Austin Matthews isn't in the lineup over the course of his career. Um, and then a 7-0 win against the Pittsburgh Penguins without Matthews, and that was a surprise. Like, he was at the morning skate, they were counting on him to actually play, and so they had to really shift their lineup around because they didn't really have a backup plan. It wasn't just plug this person here and keep everything the same. They changed everything 1 through 4. So it could have an impact. Certainly, when you don't have the leading goal scorer in the NHL, that's tough. But the Maple Leafs have surprisingly have always kind of elevated their game whenever Matthews hasn't been in the lineup. So it could create some interesting matchups. But for the most part, yeah, I think whether he's in or out, it should be a tough test for the Rangers for sure.
Yeah, tough test following that game on Tuesday. That's where I met you at MSG. You mentioned that you love to be in the garden. I wanted to ask for our viewers. I've had the experience. I can't believe we didn't talk about this before. I had the chance to watch a Leafs game in Toronto in 2018. So Matthews, Nylander, they're there. I had a different experience as a fan in New York and in Toronto. What do you find is different about those markets? Because I think when we state on the podcast that the Maple Leafs, Canada is just a different animal. If you could summarize it simply, what makes it different?
Whew, let's see. Like, the Leafs are a passionate fan base for sure. There's
Hmm.
no question about it. But the vibe inside the building
Hmm.
seems to be a very reserved vibe. So,
Hmm.
there are a lot of Leaf fans who are there, but they're just quiet because they're so into the game that they're paying attention. But then you don't get the same kind of like loud vibe atmosphere.
Hmm.
Where whenever I'm in New York, maybe the last game where I met you might have been the quietest, and maybe that was the result. But in any other time I've been at MSG for a game of any kind, there's just a passion, like the New York fan passion that I could just feel instantly when I'm in there. Like, even the goal song, like that history of the goal song, when the Rangers score a goal, you can hear the whole crowd just really get into it. There's nothing like that in Toronto.
Hmm.
In Toronto, if things are going well, the fans will get into it. They're very reactionary, but other than that, like, actually, my favorite my favorite experience being on the road is seeing the Leaf fans on the road, because you just hear them, and they're more present on the road, I find, than when they're at home. And so, and I think we talked about this, like a Leafs Habs game in Montreal on a Saturday night is like
Hmm.
the mecca of all hockey experiences. But then outside of that, any game I go to at Madison Square Garden, I call that building the mecca, because it just is. Like, I love the history of that building. I love everything about it just being there. I like how that the ice surface isn't on the ground floor, that it's on the 5th floor above Penn Station, and like all the other weird quirks and stuff that come with that building.
Hmm.
Like just even from the alignment. I remember my first time there was the first year of the big reno that they did in
Okay,
2011.
with the
So
bridge.
like yeah, it looked very different. We were sitting up in the 100 level because they didn't have that big 10th floor press box built up yet.
Hmm.
And then like in year 2, they had us in like the back corner because it was like a little box because they were still building that catwalk upstairs. So
Hmm.
like even just seeing that kind of dig and like it's just such an iconic location just being where it is and everything historically that's been there, like growing up being a fan of a lot of different sports, I can point to other things that have happened in that building
Hmm.
that is just it's really awesome. So yeah, Leaf experience in Toronto. It's great. The fans are very passionate, but because it's Toronto, because it's such a high price ticket and everything else that comes with it, I just don't get the same sort of home fat like passion that I do whenever I'm at a New York event, whether it's in New York or even on the island, like the day before at UBS. Like the Islanders fan base is pretty damn passionate too. So
Especially in
that's
that
the
game.
yeah. Oh, yes, especially in that game. Like, there's just I don't know. It's so different, and that's what I love about New York. I always tell people when I'm in New York, I'm in my spiritual home because there's just so much I love about it. There's just so much I love about the city.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, to experience that night in and night out is special, and I
Yeah.
think something that New York and Toronto relate with is the fandom. Original Six, intense,
Hmm.
tough. Probably the two toughest tickets I would say in maybe all of sports. The cities to play in, top of the Forbes list every year. David, question regarding this is a month ago now. Marchand incident, Bertuzzi Reeves on the bench. What has changed in the culture under Treveling, where with Dubas, who returned last night, it seemed like they didn't have the sandpaper. They acquire the sandpaper. Has that changed since that incident? Is it something you're noticing where they're trying to take a little more of an edgy approach? And do you think that will play into not only Tuesday's match against New York, but the rest of the season, potentially in the playoffs?
I think it could help them. I mean, you mentioned that incident. There was one most recently now too, without Austin Matthews. Matthew Nyes became the first Leaf in over 8 seasons to get a Gordie Howe hat trick. And like two of the things that he did, the goal and the fight happened in the first 5 minutes of the game.
Oh, wow.
And that's just not something you typically see. And there
Hmm.
were other incidences too. There was a game against the Vancouver Canucks in November, which was about 8 days after that incident you're referencing, where Max Domi and Mark Giordano in that first period both take instigator penalties for fights that they start, and they still go on to win the game despite that disadvantage, which was
Hmm.
crazy to me. And you are kind of seeing that, but yeah, that was a big watermark of Tree Living's tenure here, which was to he actually said there's some snot in this game that these guys provide, right? So there was the Bertuzzi stuff, the guy who can go to the net and kind of do that. He was a bit of a slow starter with the Leafs, and it wasn't looking like it was kind of fitting well. But he's actually been one of their best players in the last few weeks from an analytical standpoint, from a goal production standpoint in terms of creating plays, not necessarily converting, but creating plays. He's doing all those things and working out really well in the top six. And some of the other guys that they brought in, it's starting to feel like they're getting that identity. One of the things that I got bored about with this team before this year was the Atlantic was so not competitive.
Hmm.
And the Leafs would run into the last 2, 3 months of the previous 2 seasons not being able to chase Boston or Tampa or whoever was in first. And it was literally you're playing to finish second or third, and that's it. And that's not good for a team that's trying to build on some positive stresses. And here, this team, it's actually good what they're going through. They're going through some real tough tests early on, and each game is a fight for where they're going to finish in the standings. And I do think it actually better sets them up for the playoffs. Whether it converts, we'll see. But yeah, there are some differences with this team in terms of those guys you mentioned, and the snot, the piss, the vinegar, all those words that Tree Living used that a lot of Leaf fans have criticized have been missing from maybe some of the core guys. And so maybe it's starting to spill in. So we'll see. I think it will be good for them, but now that they're getting some results, it's good. But there is some concern that their possession numbers aren't as good as it used to be, and that if they don't fight this ability to stay out of overtimes, that it could bite them, and maybe they miss the playoffs. So it's a real dogfight for them. But it's also speaks to how competitive the Atlantic Division is for the first time in a long time. It's actually fun to watch a race instead of, oh, okay, they're either second or third for the final few months, and really that's not a race for anything. So it's good stress to build on.
Yeah, two things to that. One, 100%. I think when the Rangers brought in Reeves, Barkley, Goodrow, they were players that they may not have a lasting impact, but what they bring is those, it's in the locker room. And the Rangers suffered from not having Ryan Reeves last year as a leader, which is it for listeners, it sounds strange that he can be a leader, but it showed the younger guys and it gave them it empowered them to have the capability to play with an edge. Two, the Rangers were in a similar position last year, landlocked, where they looked like they were going to play the Devils from January on. They lost all the contests against the Devils in the second half of the season and then lost to them in the postseason. So that was a tough pill to swallow, and that's why Peter Laviolette's brought changes. I had
Mhm.
a question regarding two New York Rangers players before we preview the game. Jimmy Vesey and Eric Gustafson. What were your impressions of them, and what are your impressions of them and how they're playing in New York?
Yeah, so it's funny. Jimmy Vesey's an interesting one because they brought him in that COVID season,
Mhm,
and he started in the top 6, and they were really kind of hoping for that Jimmy Vesey early in his NHL career and what he showed in college to kind
mhm.
of bring some offense there. And the unfortunate part there is how VC was treated was very public, because there's an Amazon Prime series called All or Nothing where you see Sheldon Keefe and Jimmy VC have a lot of interaction, and not very positive interaction, and you can kind of see the division and the derision that led there to VC's exit. And so I don't know if VC's ever spoken about this since joining the Rangers, but one of the things that he eventually kind of had to realize is, and a lot of NHL players realize this if they're going to survive, is what are they in the NHL?
Mhm.
And so VC came to a point where he finally found a home with the Rangers, but he wasn't going to be that same type of player that he was expected to be when he was first there or with the Leafs. He was going to be a utility bottom 6 guy who can defend and can kind of last in the NHL. And so that's where it's been successful for him. And so it's really funny because not this season, but last season, I believe he scored twice against the Leafs in that game,
Mhm.
in that first game back. And a fellow reporter of mine asked Keefe, he was not in a good mood. And he asked Keefe, are you sick of former Leafs kind of scoring or having big games against you guys? And he just looked at me, he goes, are we done here? And that was the end of the news conference. So,
Oh, so not
so
not a good run there.
no, but so that's great for VC. Like, I'm glad
Mhm.
he's kind of found his game in the NHL, because a lot of guys either make the jump or they come out and they're highly touted, as VC was coming out of college.
I
There
don't
was
think there
certainly,
was a player honestly, I know with the draft recent drafts, Bedard, Hughes, right, Lafreniere, but
yeah,
I think VC was such a unique case, he might have been more highly touted than some of the top picks.
yeah, it was. I think his dad was a scout for the Leafs as well, so there was also that talk there and that connection
Mhm.
uh, for a little while, and probably how he ended up in Toronto as well for that little bit. But
Yeah.
Yeah, if you watch if your viewers and listeners watch the All or Nothing series, you'll learn a lot about why it didn't work for VC in Toronto there. Because there's a lot of
Primary source right there for the listeners. Primary
yeah,
source.
like, and it's all mic'd up. It's all behind the scenes. It's not on the cutting room floor, so you can see it. So there's that. As far as Eric Gustafson goes, I really liked Eric Gustafson. I actually got to know him briefly in my travels on the road. There were a couple of games I covered where it was just me, and so I got to talk to him and kind of learn a little bit about what he was about. And unfortunately for Eric Gustafson, he went through a couple things in his very brief tenure with the Leafs. So he was brought in late to be a depth defenseman, but he certainly added an element that the Leafs were missing, which was offense and someone who could quarterback the power play and can do that stuff. And earlier in the year, he had a hat trick against the Leafs, and so it was funny. He was kind of laughing about that when he was asked about that. But with Eric Gustafson, he came on. He looked pretty good in the games that he played. Then he got his wife, like his kid had it was just 1 years old at the time, and was sick, and they didn't know what was going on, so the team gave him permission to go back to Washington. And when I caught up with him when he came back, I didn't expect he would necessarily share what the reason was, but he said that they discovered that his youngest kid had was gluten free, like was allergic to gluten, and they didn't know because they didn't have that in their family. And the kid was one. They kept feeding her the same stuff before. Her name was Lucy, and so that led to that absence. And then when he came back, he was going to play again, and he was actually going to be on PP1 for a game that they were going to rest Morgan Riley because they had these 9 defensemen on the roster. And so they were trying to find opportunities for guys like him and Shen and all this depth that they added at the trade deadline. And then he got hurt in the warm-up. He suffered an upper body injury in the warm-up and couldn't play in that game. And so he played some playoff games. And I actually liked what he brought to the Leafs, and I do think he could have helped them there. But from what I understand, it was just never going to be an option for him to play for the Leafs again. And so that's why I think there was a desire for him to kind of stay in that area close to DC where he is now.
Mhm.
And I'm not surprised at all that it's worked out so wonderfully for him in New York in terms of the offense that he's providing, because he does have that element to his game. He knows how to shoot it. He can break the puck out. It's just a perfect fit and a really great cap hit for the Rangers too, like
Yeah.
for what he brings to that team.
I mean, talk about bargain bin. They did manage to get a few of those in the offseason that have gone miles ahead of expectation. Now, previewing the game on Tuesday night. Not to get into too many specifics, few 2 days out from now, but with the Maple Leafs, they come into the Garden, smoke the Rangers 7-3, and it was on the back of top performers. Martin Jones played pretty well. For the Leafs, and from the perspective of the away jerseys and away uniforms, what I guess negative takeaways do you have from the Rangers as a team? Because I think right now, I don't want to pump negativity into the Rangers sphere of things, but it is important to illustrate like what went wrong in that game, because the Rangers have had a number of games where they lose 4-0 and it's just a horrible effort, and then they come back and they have to play in almost a bounce back game. They put themselves in a position like that often in the last month. I want to know from the outsider's perspective, what is that like?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I look at teams, I look at usually what the Leafs are doing and not
Mhm.
necessarily the other side, but it looked like the Rangers weren't ready for the Leafs overwhelming them. And I don't know if they took them lightly, because before that game, the Leafs had spent, and the Leafs still have this issue, is that they just had difficulty closing out games. Like they really did. Like they lead the NHL in the amount of times games have gone to overtime. And so I think maybe the Rangers kind of had this in the back of their mind that, okay, still things within reach. They're going to be able to turn it on. They have the weapons, and at some point, Toronto's going to relent. And it didn't happen. And it's actually a feather of the cap to the Maple Leafs that for the first time in a while, they were actually just able to just kind of push through and do it. Now, I don't know if it's because it's the dad's trip and maybe there's more of an accountability of playing well in front of all your dads there together
Mhm.
and not letting up that way. But there's the fact that Austin Matthews turned it on, and some of the weapons that are there that they actually performed in that third period, and it looked like the Rangers just kind of sat back. That's what it looked like, at least. And so I'm curious to see how they'll respond in that return match. And Toronto's probably riding the highest that they've had in a long time, just given that they had their former GM in the building. Um, it's a team in Pittsburgh that, even though they've been struggling, have given the Leafs historically all kinds of problems. Even this season, Pittsburgh beat Toronto when they met at their barn.
Mhm.
So I'm curious to see now how that goes. The other thing I should point out too is the Leafs schedule has been pretty intense. They just finished 6 games in 10 days. And before that, they've had a pretty loose schedule because of flying to Sweden, because of being on the road, and how many days between games. Their first back-to-back instance wasn't until mid-November, but now they have a lot in a short period of time.
Mhm.
And tomorrow is going to be their first practice in 12 days.
I
Like
saw
they've
you wrote a piece on that.
yeah, it was what was weird about it was they were supposed to practice 2 days ago. We have a little Twitter account that's locked, that's just meant for teams, that's by the team, that is just meant for media that covers the team on a daily basis to give us their practice schedule. And so they tweeted out right after the game, practice at whatever, noon, and then
Mhm.
58 minutes later, actually, we're not practicing anymore. I've never seen that happen. The team has not usually done that. And so we had to ask about it because that was pretty significant. And it was like, yeah, they're just, with the flu and all that other stuff that's going on around the team, they just had to decide to just prioritize rest and treat morning skates as if they're mini practices, which are not ideal for the team. They can't really do the same stuff. They can't exhaust the players because
Mhm.
they have to play later that night. So they have to get their pregame naps in and all that stuff. And so tomorrow, because it's the first time in a while that they've had 2 days before a game, they're actually going to have a practice for the first time. And so I'm curious to see what that does for the Leafs against the Rangers, because with the flu bug and everything that's kind of going on, everything's really up in the air. So yeah, I'm curious to see how the Leafs respond to that, how they do with their goalies, with the Jones at least performing well, who starts in goal there, because now there's a bit of a, who do you kind of go with now that Samsonov has struggled and Jones is performing well? So I don't know. There's a lot up in the air that we're going to find out very soon.
The Rangers are in a similar boat with Igor Shesterkin, John Quick. They're both Igor's had his struggles and he's the franchise goaltender. And
Yeah.
Jonathan Quick comes in and doesn't view himself as a backup. In the words of Peter Laviolette, he's 9-0-1 now. I question who they'll start against Toronto. We won't know until closer to, or really the night of. But
Yeah.
in terms of standout players for the Rangers, normally that guy is Igor, Vezina winner. But from your point of view, the Rangers are heading into Toronto. Who are players that you feel the Leafs should watch out for?
Well, for me, it's always Artemi Panarin. I mean, the guy is really living up to his contract this season with the way he's
Mhm.
been able to produce. I can't remember when we were there, he extended his home point streak. He hasn't had a game at home without a point yet, right? Or is that
Mhm.
finally broken? Uh,
That's true.
okay, so there is that. Um, but Mika Zibanejad's always been deadly against the Leafs. It always seems like whenever I see a Leafs Rangers game, Mika Zibanejad is always on the board. Always. Like
There's
always. Like
always
look
that guy.
there's that. It's actually really funny, even though Ryan Reeves is hurt and won't play in this game. My one standout memory of Ryan Reeves is that game we were talking about with VC. Like Ryan Reeves had a pair of goals too.
Yep.
And Ryan Reeves not goal scoring. He scored twice against the Maple Leafs. And I remember, there was a lot of mixed feelings about the Leafs signing Ryan Reeves. And the first memory I pointed to was, oh, he scored twice. I remember when he scored twice against the Leafs in that game, and Keith was really upset because the fourth line. Can't remember if VC was on the same line with Reeves at that time, but like it was like when your fourth line is beating you that way, that's where you really get upset. So I remember, I just remember that lasting feeling there, and guys on the Rangers that seemed to just haunt the Maple Leafs. But Zibanejad, for some reason or another, always produces against the Maple Leafs. Even I do believe he scored in that game too, against the Maple Leafs, the last meeting, because I remember it was like a power play goal. He just like wired one from the flank. So yeah, those are the guys for sure to watch. But Zibanejad seems to be especially dangerous against the Maple Leafs for some reason. He just seems to get on the board against Toronto.
We talked about a few Swedish players, right? Zibanejad, one of those guys. Michael Nylander, now William Nylander. Can you talk about his? I think something culturally that's going on is not only his style points, what he's doing off the ice, what he's doing on the ice. They play in Sweden. How has his season gone? A few seasons back, he requests more money on his contract. It
Yeah,
looks like he might play himself out of Toronto, but for this season, focusing on right now, what has elevated his game?
I
And
think that
what's really
yeah.
changed since his younger years?
So I don't know if a lot has changed other than the fact that he's become more defensively responsible, because the offensive talent and the dedication to the game has always been there. That's always been there, even when he was with the Marlies, when he first came up. He's always one of the first players on the ice, working on his edges and stick handling, like just little drills by himself, and hand-eye coordination, all that stuff. His dedication has always been there. Um, every year, though, the frustration with Nylander would seem to be that he would run into these ruts where defensively he wouldn't be as responsible, and there'd be times where he would be actively benched. We've seen it. This year, he got off to a really hot start. Everything was going his way. He's in that contract year. Whether players will tell you after they retire, they'll never admit it on the record, but they always play harder for that contract year because they know what they're playing for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. And so certainly he's trying to show that he's worth the same kind of money as some of his upper echelon teammates have been earning. And so I don't necessarily subscribe to the notion that if he continued to play that way, that he'd be playing himself out of Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Because look at the Leafs cap situation; they have so many one-year deals that are expiring that maybe them outside of other teams have the most amount of cap space expiring at the end of this year, combined with the expected 5% increase that's going to come. So if the Leafs feel it's worth it, they can give them an increase. I don't think there's an issue there.
Okay.
I think it's, he got off to that hot start. The asking price was high. There was that concern. There's been a little bit of a dip recently. And so I wonder if the Leafs are just waiting to let this whole year play out, and then eventually something happens. But the one intel that I've been able to kind of match is, as much as he loves playing in Toronto, I think it's really going to come down to the money. And the Leafs do have a money advantage that they could offer him that 8th year if they feel it's worth it. So there is that advantage. But outside of that, I think it is going to come down to the money for William Nylander, no matter how much he loves it here. And I think there's going to be teams that are going to have that flexibility to perhaps maybe give him that. And it's going to be up to Toronto to decide if they want to match that.
Now, I have one more question. I'm pulling up. My partner had asked me, my broadcast partner had asked me to bring this up on the show. So I figured best for last. Is Martin Jones playing that good? Did he play that good in his trip to New York? or did the Rangers just not have a good night? And I know that's a simple question, but I think
Yeah.
it is valuable in the scope of goaltending with Toronto. The last number of years, they've gone from Freddie Anderson to Campbell to the split between Murray, Samsonov. Now there's Woll and Martin Jones. It's still Samsonov is there, but as you mentioned earlier, not playing to the expectation. So with a player like Martin Jones, is this kind of like a success story that he's kind of like playing well right now and we're going to see where it goes? Or was that a fluke in his season?
It's tough to say because he backed that up with the shutout the other night. But the thing too, and we were kind of talking about this, he quietly picked up that shutout. Like it's like 38 saves, and he even admitted it. He's like, I wasn't asked to do anything crazy. That's a direct quote. And so like usually that speaks to how well the team is playing in front of you. If you're
Mhm.
just getting square on shots and you don't have to like stretch out or make these 10 bell saves or anything that save, like you're not the reason they won essentially. Like you
Mhm.
just did your job and you got it. And so Jones, to his credit, has done what's asked of him, and the team has played well in front of him. And there is something to that whole this is a new goalie that the team tends to kind of, play back or dig in more on the back check in that regard and make sure
Mhm.
that they don't take high flying risks. And there is some element to that. And so, look, I'm not taking anything away from Martin Jones. He's played really well. I do think that the team played extraordinarily well in front of him in that game against the Rangers and even in that game against Pittsburgh. And so I think it's going to come down to, well, is Jones going to be the guy, or is he going to be one of these things where when you ask him to make those saves when you're back on a 2-on-1, can he do it? Like that's
Mhm.
really what it comes down to. That's kind of Shesterkin's bread and butter. That's how he became a Vezina. Like he's many times during the Rangers years and over the years, he was the reason they won a game. And
Yeah.
you need kind of like the Leafs have not had to have that. And in Samsonov's case this year, where he struggled, the team had not played well in front of him either. And I'm not trying to just defend him, but they need saves from him too. And it's been
Mhm.
kind of so I suspect because the team is playing well in front of Jones, that might be the symptom why he gets to start again. But yeah, I think the Rangers do need to play better against them. And I'm not sold on Jones yet because even with Seattle, like he had a winning record and he played half the games, but his save percentage was terrible.
Mhm.
So so it's tough. It's really tough to know what Martin Jones is right now. But surely enough, there was concern that the Leafs were going to lose him on waivers because they seem to always lose their third goalie on waivers, and that didn't happen this year. And right now, I'm pretty sure they're pretty ecstatic that with Wall injured and Samsonov struggling, that they have this goaltender that has just been lights out for them, at least in terms of just getting the results. He's 3-0. He got that win, not the Rangers, but the one where he came on in relief. I believe that was against Ottawa. He ended up getting the win, but he got the win because he gave up the third goal. It was Wall's win, but because he gave up the third goal, and the way it works, it's different than baseball in terms of wins and losses for goalies.
Mhm.
Uh, he ended up getting the win in that, even though he only made 9 saves out of 10. So, yeah, it's tough to say. We'll find out, but yeah, I think it was a combination of things that led to the Rangers losing that game against the Leafs.
We got Rangers Leafs on Tuesday. David, thank you so much for joining. Continue consuming our hockey news content. And if you have the opportunity, go check out David's work at the Hockey News Toronto Maple Leafs. They are leading the charge. They are what the New York Rangers cite for me and Johnny, what we're aspiring to be. Thanks for coming on,
You're
Puck
doing
Talk.
great. You guys are doing great work as well.
I appreciate
Thank you.
this.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Appreciate you having me on.
Of course. And hope to have you on towards the back end of the season.
Oh, you got
Thank
it.
you to David for coming on. It's always great to have that other perspective. We had Christian Belfraser on. It's great to have the other perspective, especially those big matchups. We love having guests on, and we decided the last few weeks to go Steve-O, just the guys here, just Puck Talk CS strictly. but it is good. We're planning on having more guests on and having more guest spots as we move through the season with those big matchups. So thank you, David, for coming on. It's always great to talk, and it was great to meet him last Tuesday. Steve-O, final thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, David. That was awesome take. Final thoughts. This is going to be an interesting week coming up here. I know we don't really play a lot of Metro teams coming up. So even though we're not going to be playing those head-to-head matchups where, we have that direct impact to win and move up in the standings, I still think, all these games are important. And again, until we get to 2024, I want to see an Igor shutout. If we're not going to see
Oh,
Igor score a goal, let's get him a shutout.
all right. Put it on the Christmas list, Steve-O.
I
Igor
want to see that
shutout.
under the
Number
tree.
one, highlighted, emboldened. Yeah, I don't know. If I were to say one thing I'd love to see, I think Mika's heating up, which I'm a big like Mika, when he's at his best, is like the best player on the team, which is such a weird dynamic. Actually, I want to talk about this when we could talk about a longer conversation, and I think it deserves a bigger conversation. But Mika heating is up there. And the other thing I'll say, if we're gonna say Christmas list, it's a little early. Alexi Lafreniere is starting to start. He's a little cold net right now. And I think the team is going to go, like I said last week, as far as definitely that second line can carry you, definitely where that shutdown line can bring you. And Igor, you nailed it on the head. So we'll see what happens in this big matchup against the Leafs. They don't play again until, I believe, Friday against the Edmonton Oilers. So
Yep. Also, another one in there underneath the tree. Uber train absolutely take off from the station. I mean, nothing better than hopping on the Truber chain to start the new year in 2024. So I'd love to see that underneath the tree. So that'll wrap us up here for this episode of Puck Talk CS. Please, everybody, take a look at pucktalkcs.com. Follow us on the Instagram. We have all of our reels, our content, our Twitter, all of our analysis up there. Please check that out. Always remember, LGR, and it's just the luck of the puck.